Some words can change your future long before you understand why they were spoken. Noah Bennett believed his first assignment at Harlow University Medical Center would be the most ordinary day of his life. At 22 years old, the quiet white-skinned male Omega had spent years studying legal compliance, hoping that careful work and even quieter ambition would help him build a respectable career without attracting unnecessary attention. In modern American Omegaverse society, keeping a low profile was often the safest choice for an Omega who wanted to be judged by talent rather than assumptions. The laws claimed every Alpha, Beta, and Omega possessed equal rights, but everyone understood that reputation still shaped opportunity. Noah reminded himself of that reality as he adjusted his navy blazer, checked the identification badge clipped neatly to his pocket, and entered the enormous glass atrium of Harlow University Medical Center. The annual National Alpha, Beta, and Omega Medical Law Symposium had drawn physicians, attorneys, researchers, lawmakers, and representatives from nearly every major registry office across the country. Noah's responsibility sounded simple. He would organize legal documents, guide visiting speakers, and assist the conference coordinators during the morning sessions. His supervisor smiled before disappearing toward another meeting. "Relax," she told him. "Today is mostly paperwork." Noah almost laughed. Paperwork was exactly the kind of challenge he enjoyed. The spacious convention hall reflected bright morning sunlight through towering windows. Polished marble floors shimmered beneath elegant chandeliers, and digital displays welcomed hundreds of distinguished guests. Everywhere Noah looked, people discussed new healthcare regulations, Omega workplace protections, PAC licensing reforms, and updates to federal bond recognition procedures. Every conversation reminded him how deeply Alpha and Omega law influenced daily American life. Employment contracts, inheritance rights, emergency medical decisions, family guardianship, and even professional certifications depended upon legal classifications maintained by the National Registry. Authority. Unlike most attendees, Noah had never questioned those systems. He believed they existed to protect everyone equally. Carrying a stack of conference materials, he carefully crossed the busy hallway toward the legal presentation room. Someone accidentally bumped his shoulder, causing several folders to slide from his arms onto the polished floor. Before Noah could kneel to collect them, another young man immediately crouched beside him. He wore a resident physician's white coat and smiled with effortless friendliness. "Sorry about that," the doctor said while helping gather the papers. "You must be the new junior everyone mentioned." Noah nodded politely. "My first day." The resident laughed. "Well, sweetheart, you picked one busy morning." The word escaped naturally, spoken with innocent kindness rather than disrespect. Noah smiled awkwardly, thanked him, and reached for the final folder. Then the entire hallway became silent. It happened so suddenly that the distant conversations, footsteps, and ringing elevators seemed to disappear all at once. Noah slowly looked up. Every face around him had turned toward the main entrance. Security officers straightened instinctively. Registry officials stopped speaking in mid-sentence. Even experienced surgeons lowered their voices. The enormous glass doors opened without haste, and a small group of impeccably dressed men entered the building. They did not display weapons or threats. They carried themselves with quiet confidence that commanded attention without raising a single voice. At the center walked Dominic Callahan. Noah recognized the name immediately. Every student studying Alpha and Omega law knew the Callahan Syndicate. Although newspapers frequently described the organization as a mafia family, legal scholars used a different title, Guardian Clan. Long before the modern registry existed, several Guardian clans had received limited legal authority to protect vulnerable Omegas during disputes involving classification, inheritance, and unlawful coercion. Most people believe those ancient powers had become ceremonial after federal reforms. Dominic Callahan rarely appeared in public, making his unexpected arrival at a medical law symposium impossible to ignore. Tall, composed, and dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, the Alpha moved through the crowded atrium with calm precision. His sharp eyes scanned the room once before stopping on Noah. The silence deepened. Noah instinctively took half a step backward, confused by the intense attention directed towards someone as ordinary as himself. The resident physician beside him looked equally puzzled. Dominic approached until only a few feet separated them. Without raising his voice, he spoke words that echoed through the motionless hall with astonishing clarity. "He is my Omega." The statement struck the gathering harder than any alarm could have. Gasps spread across the conference hall. Registry representatives immediately reached for secure tablets. Senior attorneys exchanged stunned expressions. Noah's heart pounded as he stared at the Alpha standing before him. They had never met. They had never spoken. Yet every person in the room understood the legal meaning of a public claim, and every person also knew that such a declaration should have been impossible under current registry law. Noah could not find a single explanation that made sense. He stood frozen beneath the brilliant lights of the convention hall, while every pair of eyes remained fixed on him and Dominic Callahan. The silence lasted only a few seconds before whispers swept across the room like a rising tide. Attorneys quietly quoted sections of federal bond law. Physicians exchanged nervous glances. Registry officials immediately activated secure government tablets connected to the National Bond Registry. Noah instinctively opened his mouth to deny everything, but the confusion inside him was stronger than any words he could form. He had never seen Dominic before today. He had never entered a Guardian clan estate. He had never registered a bond with anyone. Nothing about the Alpha's declaration matched the life Noah remembered. A senior registry officer stepped forward with professional composure. "Mr. Callahan," she said carefully, "a public claim requires verification through the National Bond Registry under Federal Alpha and Omega recognition law." Dominic met her gaze without hesitation. "Verify it." The official nodded toward a nearby technician. Within moments, one of the massive digital displays that had welcomed conference guests shifted to secure registry access. Several layers of encrypted authorization appeared before the system accepted high-level credentials. Everyone watched the loading symbol rotate across the enormous screen. Noah's pulse grew faster with every passing second. He almost hoped the registry would immediately reject the claim so this strange misunderstanding could finally end. Instead, the screen displayed his legal profile. Noah Bennett. Omega. Employment status verified. Medical status verified. Bond recognition. Processing. The loading icon continued spinning far longer than anyone expected. Soft murmurs spread through the audience. One registry administrator frowned and restarted the request. The same delay returned. Finally, bright red letters appeared across the center of the display. Classified. Access restricted. Authorization denied. The conference hall erupted with shocked voices. Noah stared at the screen in disbelief. He had studied registry procedures throughout law school. Ordinary bonds never produced classified results. Even confidential government records displayed limited information to authorized personnel. This response was different. It was as though the system recognized the record while refusing to admit that anyone had permission to see it. Before anyone else could react, another group entered from the opposite side of the atrium. Their dark blue credentials identified them as executives from the Omega Registration Authority. Walking confidently at their center was Chairman Vincent Hawthorne, a distinguished Alpha whose influence reached nearly every federal committee responsible for Omega classification policy. His calm expression revealed little emotion, yet the instant his eyes settled on the classified screen, Noah noticed something unexpected. It was not surprise. It was recognition. Vincent approached with measured authority. "Suspend this conference immediately," he instructed. Security personnel obeyed without argument. Turning toward Dominic, Vincent spoke in an even tone. "The registry has confirmed that this Omega is connected to restricted federal records. Until his legal status can be investigated, he must be transferred into registration authority custody." Noah felt his stomach tighten. "I have done nothing wrong," he said quietly. Vincent answered without looking at him. "That determination has not yet been made." Dominic finally took one deliberate step forward. His voice remained calm, but every word carried unmistakable certainty. "No." The single word halted the growing movement around them. Vincent folded his hands behind his back. "Guardian authority does not supersede a federal investigation." Dominic's expression never changed. Guardian authority exists precisely to prevent an Omega with classified legal status from being removed before due process is completed. Several legal scholars exchanged uneasy looks. Noah recognized the statute Dominic referenced, but only vaguely. It belonged to a collection of historical guardian provisions rarely discussed in modern classrooms, because most professors believed they had become obsolete decades earlier. Vincent's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Those provisions are no longer relevant. If they were irrelevant, Dominic replied evenly, the registry would not have returned a classified response. Once again, the enormous hall fell silent. Noah realized that everyone present had stopped debating whether Dominic's claim was true. The far more frightening question had become why the National Bond Registry appeared to recognize something that the highest officials in the country either could not or would not explain. Dominic did not wait for another argument. With remarkable composure, he turned toward Noah instead of the officials surrounding them. "Come with me," he said in a calm voice that carried neither command nor pressure. Noah hesitated. Every instinct told him that following a man he had met only minutes earlier was reckless, yet remaining inside the conference hall while federal authorities debated his legal status felt even less certain. Before he could answer, Emily Rhodes, a beta attorney assigned to the symposium's legal advisory team, stepped forward. She adjusted her glasses and addressed Noah directly. Under current Guardian review procedures, you have the right to accept temporary protection until the registry establishes jurisdiction. The decision is yours. Noah looked from Emily to Dominic and then toward Chairman Vincent Hawthorne, whose expression remained unreadable. The chairman did not object. Instead, he simply watched, as though he already expected what would happen next. Noah slowly nodded. "I will accept temporary Guardian protection until someone explains what is happening." Dominic inclined his head once before leading Noah through a private exit accompanied by several members of the Callahan security detail. Their convoy left downtown Boston behind and traveled nearly 40 miles into the wooded countryside of Massachusetts. The towering skyline gradually disappeared, replaced by quiet roads lined with ancient oak trees and stone walls that looked older than the nation itself. Eventually, black iron gates opened before an expansive estate hidden beyond the forest. Noah had expected a heavily fortified headquarters worthy of newspaper headlines describing a mafia empire. Instead, Callahan Manor resembled a preserved historical estate surrounded by gardens, libraries, administrative buildings, and a small legal archive rather than anything resembling organized crime. Staff members greeted Dominic respectfully, but something unexpected happened when Noah stepped from the vehicle. Every alpha standing near the entrance lowered his head for a brief moment before returning to his duties. No one stared at him. No one whispered. No one treated him as property. They welcomed him with the same quiet respect shown to honored guests. Noah noticed his confusion and finally asked the question that had been growing since the conference. "Why are they greeting me like that?" Dominic answered while leading him through the grand entrance hall lined with portraits stretching back generations. "Because they recognize the authority of Guardian tradition." Noah frowned. "I thought Guardian clans were basically ceremonial now." Dominic stopped beneath a large, stained glass emblem displaying intertwined alpha, beta, and omega symbols. That is what most universities teach because the modern registry replaced much of the original system. What they rarely explain is that Congress never abolished Guardian authority. It simply became dormant because no qualifying cases appeared for decades. Noah listened carefully. Dominic continued, "Guardian clans were never created to rule omegas. They were created to prevent powerful institutions from controlling them. When an omega becomes connected to classified legal status that cannot be reviewed openly, a Guardian Alpha has the temporary legal responsibility to ensure that no agency can remove that omega before every historical protection has been examined." Noah struggled to absorb the explanation. "Then why would the registry classify me?" Dominic looked toward one of the oldest portraits in the hallway before answering. "That is the question I have spent years trying to answer." Those words surprised Noah even more than the public claim itself. "Years?" Dominic met his eyes. "Yes." Before Noah could ask another question, an elderly archivist entered carrying a leather-bound volume sealed with an embossed silver crest. The man respectfully handed it to Dominic without speaking. Dominic placed the heavy book upon a long oak table inside an elegant library filled with shelves reaching almost to the ceiling. Thousands of carefully preserved legal volumes surrounded them. "Everything inside this estate exists for one purpose," Dominic explained. "To preserve records that existed before the National Registry centralized Alpha and Omega law." Noah carefully opened the book. Instead of family finances or criminal ledgers, he found handwritten copies of constitutional amendments, guardian charters, historical court rulings, and protection agreements dating back more than 100 years. Every page revealed a forgotten legal framework that had once governed relations between alphas, betas, and omegas across the country. None of it had appeared in his law school textbooks. Dominic quietly closed the volume again before Noah could continue reading. "There is still too much you do not know," he said. "If I reveal everything now, you will not know whom to trust." Noah searched Dominic's face for deception, but found only quiet determination. For the first time since his impossible day had begun, he realized that the greatest mystery was no longer why Dominic had publicly claimed him. It was why someone had spent decades making certain that the truth remained buried beneath laws almost everyone believed had disappeared. The following morning, the peaceful atmosphere inside Callahan Manor contrasted sharply with the uncertainty that still weighed on Noah's mind. Although the estate felt secure, every unanswered question seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. After breakfast, Dominic introduced him to a private research room where historical legal records were preserved under carefully controlled conditions. Emily Rhodes arrived shortly afterward carrying several archive boxes borrowed through a judicial preservation agreement. She greeted Noah with a reassuring smile before spreading old census reports, property records, and handwritten court documents across a large oak table. "If your registry file is classified," Emily explained, "the answer probably exists somewhere outside the modern registry." Noah spent hours helping organize the fragile documents. Most appeared ordinary at first, containing tax filings, marriage certificates, and land transfers from more than a century earlier. Then Emily paused over a faded county registry listing one particular surname. "Bennett," she whispered. Noah leaned closer. The document identified the Bennett family as founding trustees of an institution called the Omega Sanctuary, a federally recognized organization established before the National Registry existed. According to the records, the sanctuary provided legal advocacy, emergency housing, education, and independent representation for Omegas whose rights had been threatened by powerful families or political interests. Noah frowned. "Why have I never heard of this?" Emily slowly opened another folder containing photocopies of old legislative journals. "Because almost every reference to the sanctuary disappeared after the registry reforms nearly 30 years ago. Law schools stopped teaching about it. Government databases archived it under restricted historical material. It was almost erased from public memory." Noah felt a strange mixture of disbelief and curiosity. He had always believed his parents came from an ordinary family with no remarkable history. They had never spoken about any sanctuary, guardian organization, or classified legal status. Emily compared several family trees before stopping at another surprising discovery. "Your grandparents served on the sanctuary's legal advisory council. Your family was not simply connected to it. They helped establish its governing structure." Before Noah could respond, Dominic quietly entered the room carrying a slim leather folder. He listened without interrupting until Emily finished presenting the evidence. "The records confirm what I expected," Dominic said. Noah immediately turned toward him. "You already knew about my family?" Dominic answered carefully. "I knew fragments. Enough to understand that your name appeared repeatedly in Guardian archives, but not enough to understand why." Noah folded his arms. "Then tell me what you do know." Dominic placed the folder on the table and opened it. Inside rested a weathered parchment bearing an elegant silver seal identical to the stained glass emblem displayed in the manor entrance. Across the top appeared the words Guardian Charter of Mutual Protection. Dominic pointed toward a paragraph written in formal legal language. The sanctuary and the Guardian clans were created together. One protected Omega rights through law. The other enforced those protections when political systems failed. Noah carefully read the document before looking up again. If that partnership existed, why would anyone erase it? Dominic remained silent for several seconds. Because an independent sanctuary limited the power of the registry. If Omegas could choose legal protection outside centralized authority, no single institution could fully control classification, guardianship, inheritance, or representation. Emily nodded slowly. Someone benefited when the sanctuary disappeared. Noah suddenly remembered Chairman Vincent Hawthorne's expression at the conference. It had not been surprise. It had been recognition. Vincent already knew my family name mattered, Noah said quietly. Dominic met his eyes with calm honesty. I believe he did. The realization sent a chill through Noah despite the warm morning sunlight filling the archive room. His ordinary life no longer seemed ordinary at all. Every document uncovered another missing piece, each pointing toward a history deliberately hidden from public view. For the first time, Noah understood that the impossible public claim at the medical conference had never been the beginning of this story. It was only the moment when secrets buried for decades had finally begun to surface. News of the classified registry records spread across legal and political circles far faster than anyone inside Callahan Manor expected. Within 2 days, every major Alpha and Omega policy organization in the country had heard rumors that a forgotten Guardian case had suddenly resurfaced. Noah remained inside the estate, studying historical records with Emily, while Dominic attended a series of private meetings that seemed to grow more tense with each passing hour. Late one afternoon, Dominic invited Noah into the Manor's original council chamber, where portraits of previous Guardian leaders overlooked a long walnut conference table. Several senior members of the Callahan family were already waiting. At the head of the table sat Harold Callahan, Dominic's father, an older alpha whose calm appearance concealed decades of leadership experience. Harold welcomed Noah politely before directing his attention toward his son. The registration authority has delivered another proposal, he said. Dominic remained standing. I already know my answer. Harold folded his hands. Listen before you refuse. The room became completely silent. Harold explained that Chairman Vincent Hawthorne had privately offered a compromise. If Dominic voluntarily surrendered Noah for federal supervision while the investigation continued, the Callahan Syndicate would retain every remaining Guardian privilege still recognized under federal law. Their historical archives would remain protected. Their legal authority would remain intact. Their political influence would survive untouched. If Dominic refused, Congress could be persuaded to suspend the Guardian Charter entirely while reviewing whether the organization still served a legitimate public purpose. Noah immediately understood the true target of the proposal. It was never about cooperation. It was about forcing a choice between protecting one Omega and preserving an institution that had existed for generations. Harold spoke again, with visible concern rather than anger. You carry responsibility for every family depending upon this charter. If Guardian authority disappears because of one decision, countless future cases may lose protection. Dominic answered without raising his voice. If Guardian authority survives only by abandoning the very Omega it exists to protect, then it has already lost its purpose. No one immediately replied. Even those who disagreed with Dominic understood the weight of his words. Noah quietly looked around the room. For the first time since arriving at the estate, he realized these people were not debating family pride or financial power. They were debating the meaning of the laws they had sworn to preserve. Harold slowly exhaled. You understand the consequences. Completely, Dominic answered. Then the responsibility belongs to you. The meeting ended without celebration or resolution. Family members quietly departed, leaving Noah and Dominic alone beneath the towering portraits. Noah broke the silence first. You could have protected your family instead of me. Dominic looked toward the old Guardian emblem carved into the wall. Those are not opposing choices. Noah shook his head gently. Your father believes they are. Dominic turned back toward him. My father fears losing an institution. I fear losing the reason that institution was created. Noah remained silent for several moments. Ever since the impossible declaration at the medical conference, he had assumed Dominic acted only because ancient Guardian law required it. Now he saw something different. Dominic was choosing the harder path even when powerful people offered him a simpler solution. That realization changed something inside Noah. Until now, he had accepted Guardian protection because circumstances left him little alternative. Standing inside the quiet council chamber, he finally made a decision that belonged entirely to him. Whatever happens next, Noah said steadily, I will not hide behind your family while you carry every risk alone. If this becomes a legal fight, I will stand beside you. If the truth about my family changes everything, then I want to help uncover it instead of waiting for someone else to decide my future. Dominic studied him carefully before offering the first genuine smile Noah had seen since they met. It was small, restrained, and filled with quiet respect. "That choice," Dominic replied, "is exactly what the sanctuary believed every Omega should always have." Outside the chamber windows, the evening sun settled behind the distant hills, casting long golden light across the historic estate. For the first time since his ordinary life had been shattered, Noah no longer felt like a frightened bystander trapped inside someone else's story. He had chosen his place within it, and whatever challenges awaited beyond the manor gates, he intended to face them beside the Alpha who had refused to surrender either his principles or the Omega he had sworn to protect. 3 days later, the Grand Pact Court convened under emergency authority for the first classified Guardian hearing in more than 30 years. The courthouse stood in Washington, District of Columbia, its towering limestone columns representing generations of Alpha, Beta, and Omega law. Reporters crowded outside the security perimeter, but the proceedings themselves remained restricted to authorized participants because of Noah Bennett's classified registry status. Noah entered the courtroom beside Dominic Callahan and Emily Rhodes. Although cameras were not permitted inside, every seat reserved for legal observers, constitutional scholars, and federal officials was filled. Chairman Vincent Hawthorne stood at the opposite counsel table with representatives from the Omega Registration Authority. The atmosphere felt solemn rather than hostile. Everyone understood that the court's decision could reshape the relationship between Guardian clans and the National Registry for years to come. 3 senior judges entered, representing each primary social designation within federal Alpha and Omega jurisprudence. After the formal opening, Vincent presented his position first. Speaking with measured confidence, he argued that the modern registry existed to provide one unified legal standard for every Alpha and Omega across the country. He acknowledged the historical importance of Guardian clans, but insisted that extraordinary authority granted generations earlier could not override contemporary federal administration. He emphasized that Noah's classified status required immediate governmental supervision until every restricted record had been examined. According to Vincent, allowing Dominic to retain custody threatened consistency within the national legal system. Several judges questioned whether Guardian authority remained legally active. Vincent replied that while portions of the charter technically remained on the books, decades of disuse had rendered those provisions functionally obsolete. Noah listened carefully. The argument sounded persuasive because it relied on procedures familiar to every modern attorney. When Vincent finished, Dominic stood without dramatic gestures. Rather than challenging the registry itself, he focused on the constitutional purpose behind the original Guardian Charter. He explained that Guardian authority had never existed to compete with federal agencies. It existed to prevent any single institution from exercising unchecked control over an Omega whose legal rights were uncertain. Dominic reminded the court that the registry itself had classified Noah's record beyond the reach of ordinary review. If even the registry acknowledged restrictions on its own authority, then historical safeguards could not simply disappear because they had become inconvenient. One of the judges leaned forward. "Can you support that interpretation with statutory authority?" Dominic looked toward Emily. She calmly approached the bench carrying a weathered legal volume recovered from the Callahan archives. "Your Honors," she said, "our research uncovered an amendment omitted from nearly every modern legal textbook." She carefully opened the fragile volume and identified a certified congressional revision adopted during the final integration of Guardian law into the federal system. The courtroom grew silent as she read the forgotten language aloud. The amendment declared that whenever an Omega's legal classification became inaccessible through ordinary registry review, a recognized Guardian Alpha retained temporary protective responsibility until the complete historical record could be examined by judicial authority. The amendment had never been repealed. It had simply vanished from standard legal instruction after later administrative reforms. Even the judges appeared surprised. Court clerks immediately compared Emily's certified copy with preserved congressional archives. Minutes later, one clerk quietly confirmed that the amendment matched the original legislative record. Vincent maintained his composure, but for the first time his confidence seemed to falter. The foundation of his argument rested upon the assumption that Guardian authority had effectively expired. Instead, the court had discovered that Congress intentionally preserved those protections for exactly the type of classified case now standing before them. After a brief recess, the judges returned with an interim ruling. They declined to transfer Noah into registration authority custody. Instead, they affirmed Dominic's temporary guardian responsibility while ordering a complete judicial investigation into every historical record connected to the Bennett family, the Omega Sanctuary, and the classified registry designation. As the hearing concluded, Noah realized the legal battle had not ended. It had only entered a new phase. Yet something fundamental had changed. For the first time since the impossible public claim, the law itself had begun revealing that the forgotten protections Dominic defended were never myths or outdated traditions. They had remained hidden in plain sight, waiting for a case important enough to bring them back into the light. The court's interim ruling brought temporary stability, but it also opened doors that had remained sealed for decades. Within days, federal archivists received judicial orders to release historical materials connected to the Bennett family and the Omega Sanctuary for confidential review. Dominic and Noah returned to Callahan Manor, where Emily coordinated with preservation specialists to compare the newly released government records against the Guardian archives already stored inside the estate. Every document revealed another missing fragment, yet one question remained unanswered. Why had Noah's parents never told him any of this? Late one evening, the chief archivist quietly approached Dominic with a small wooden box that had been hidden behind a false panel inside one of the oldest library cabinets. The box bore the faded seal of the sanctuary and a handwritten note addressed simply to the next Bennett guardian. Noah carefully lifted the lid. Inside rested several neatly folded letters, a family photograph, and a leather journal worn smooth by time. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the first letter. The familiar handwriting belonged to his mother. She wrote that if Noah was reading those words, the truth had finally found him. She explained that years earlier, she and Noah's father had discovered evidence that powerful officials intended to absorb every remaining sanctuary function into the centralized registry. They believed independent legal protection for Omegas would gradually disappear if no institution remained capable of challenging administrative decisions. Rather than risking open conflict, they chose to hide their family's historical connection, hoping Noah could grow up free from political pressure. Noah slowly lowered the letter, struggling to reconcile the ordinary childhood he remembered with the extraordinary history now unfolding before him. Dominic remained beside him in respectful silence until Noah finally asked the question he had feared most. "Did you know my parents?" Dominic looked toward the family photograph before answering. "I met them once when I was still a teenager." Noah looked up in surprise. Dominic continued carefully. "My father brought me to a confidential guardian meeting. Your parents believed reforms could still preserve both the registry and the sanctuary if the two systems remained balanced. They wanted cooperation, not division." Noah listened without interrupting. After that meeting, Dominic said quietly, "They disappeared from every official record. No criminal investigation followed. No public explanation was ever given. Only silence." Noah closed his eyes for a moment. The realization hurt, but not because it revealed betrayal. It revealed sacrifice. His parents had never abandoned their history. They had concealed it because they believed protecting their son mattered more than preserving their public legacy. Emily gently opened the leather journal next. Inside were detailed notes documenting legislative meetings, legal objections, and private correspondence exchanged between sanctuary representatives and early registry officials. One repeated signature immediately drew everyone's attention. Vincent Hawthorne. His name appeared years before he became chairman, serving on committees responsible for consolidating Omega legal authority. The journal never accused him of committing crimes. Instead, it documented a consistent effort to reduce independent oversight by transferring more authority into centralized administrative offices. Noah looked toward Dominic. He knew exactly what the sanctuary represented. Dominic nodded. "I believe he has understood from the beginning that your family preserved legal principles capable of limiting the registry's unchecked influence." Noah stared once more at his mother's final letter. For the first time since arriving at Callahan Manor, he no longer viewed himself as someone caught in another person's battle. The history belonged to his family as much as it belonged to the Guardians. He folded the letters carefully and placed them back inside the wooden box before turning toward Dominic. "I do not want these documents hidden anymore," Noah said with steady conviction. If my parents trusted the law enough to preserve the truth instead of destroying it, then I want people to see what they fought to protect. Dominic met his eyes, and the distance that had quietly remained between them since. Their first meeting seemed to disappear. Their bond was no longer built only upon guardian responsibility or legal obligation. It had become a partnership founded on mutual trust, shared purpose, and the determination to ensure that the sacrifices of the past would finally receive the justice they had been denied for far too long. Noah's decision to reveal the truth transformed a private legal dispute into a national conversation about the future of Alpha and Omega society. Acting under the authority granted by the Grand Pact Court, Emily Rhodes organized thousands of authenticated historical documents into a public legal report that could be released without exposing confidential personal records. Every page was carefully verified by independent archivists, constitutional scholars, and federal preservation experts. The report documented the original Guardian Charter, the founding principles of the Omega Sanctuary, and the legislative amendments that had quietly remained valid despite disappearing from modern legal education. Most importantly, it demonstrated that the sanctuary had never been created to oppose the National Registry. It had existed to ensure that no single institution could exercise complete control over the legal rights of Omegas without meaningful oversight. When the report became public, newspapers across the country published detailed analyses instead of sensational headlines. Television networks invited historians, attorneys, and former lawmakers to discuss the forgotten partnership between the sanctuary and the Guardian clans. Universities announced emergency symposiums to review constitutional history that had been overlooked for decades. Outside government buildings, peaceful gatherings formed as Alphas, Betas, and Omegas stood together carrying signs supporting transparency, legal accountability, and equal access to historical records. Noah watched the broadcast from Callahan Manor with mixed emotions. He had never wanted public attention, yet he realized the conversation no longer centered on him alone. It centered on an entire legal tradition that many Americans believed deserved another chance to serve the society it had originally been designed to protect. Chairman Vincent Hawthorne responded with a formal press conference defending the registration authority. He insisted that every administrative reform had been implemented in good faith to create a more consistent national system and denied intentionally concealing historical protections. However, members of Congress soon requested official hearings after independent researchers confirmed that several Guardian amendments and sanctuary references had gradually disappeared from educational materials despite never being repealed by law. The issue was no longer whether history had changed. The question had become how and why that change had occurred. Dominic refused every invitation to participate in political debates. Instead, he quietly continued cooperating with judicial investigators while encouraging Noah to speak whenever he felt ready. This should never become a story about one alpha defeating another, Dominic told him during an evening walk through the estate gardens. If lasting reform is possible, it must come from people choosing better laws instead of better enemies. Noah understood exactly what he meant. The struggle had never been about replacing one powerful institution with another. It was about restoring balance so that every Alpha, Beta, and Omega could trust the legal system protecting them. Encouraged by Emily, Noah agreed to testify before the Congressional Review Committee. Speaking calmly, he described how an ordinary junior legal assistant had unknowingly become connected to forgotten constitutional protections that even experienced attorneys no longer recognized. He spoke about his parents' decision to preserve the truth without hatred, about the Guardian family that had protected him without demanding obedience, and about the importance of allowing independent legal safeguards to exist alongside centralized administration. His testimony received respectful attention from lawmakers representing every political perspective. Weeks later, the review committee issued preliminary findings recommending immediate restoration of historical Guardian education, independent archival oversight, and a comprehensive examination of every classified registry designation connected to the sanctuary. Chairman Vincent Hawthorne voluntarily stepped aside while the investigation continued, acknowledging that public confidence required complete transparency regardless of the final conclusions. As Noah and Dominic left the Capitol together beneath a clear autumn sky, neither celebrated the moment as a personal victory. Too much work remained ahead. Yet they both recognized that something remarkable had already happened. A truth hidden for decades had finally reached the people it was always meant to protect, and an entire society had begun rebuilding its future not through fear or force, but through knowledge, accountability, and the shared belief that justice became strongest when no voice was forgotten. 1 year later, the reforms that had once seemed impossible had become part of everyday life across the country. Congress formally restored the Guardian Charter as an active component of federal Alpha and Omega law, while the Omega Sanctuary was re-established as an independent legal advocacy organization working alongside the National Registry rather than beneath it. New legislation guaranteed that any Omega involved in a classified legal matter could request temporary guardian protection before administrative decisions became final, ensuring that no single institution possessed complete authority over questions affecting personal freedom, family rights, inheritance, or legal representation. Law schools revised their textbooks to include the forgotten constitutional history that had remained hidden for decades, and future attorneys began studying the partnership between the Registry and the Sanctuary as a fundamental part of American Alpha and Omega jurisprudence. Callahan Manor no longer felt like a place protecting old secrets. Instead, it became a center where scholars, judges, historians, and community advocates gathered to preserve historical records while helping shape new policies for the future. Newspapers gradually stopped describing the Callahan Syndicate as merely a mafia organization. Increasingly, they referred to it as one of the nation's officially recognized guardian institutions, honoring both its historical responsibilities and its modern public service. Noah Bennett accepted an appointment as legal advisor to the newly formed Alpha and Omega Rights Council, where his experience allowed him to help draft practical guidelines ensuring that historical protections could function effectively within contemporary society. Although he still preferred quiet offices to crowded stages, he discovered that confidence did not require seeking attention. It simply required believing that his voice deserved to be heard when justice depended upon it. Emily Rhodes became one of the country's leading constitutional attorneys, helping train young lawyers to understand not only current legislation, but also the historical principles that gave those laws meaning. Harold Callahan watched the transformation with quiet pride. One afternoon, he admitted to Dominic that preserving an institution had never been enough. Preserving its purpose had always mattered more. Dominic smiled, knowing those words reflected everything they had fought to protect. Chairman Vincent Hawthorne appeared before the Congressional Oversight Committee after the investigation concluded. The final report found no evidence that every historical omission resulted from a single individual, but it did determine that years of administrative decisions, educational revisions, and institutional habits had gradually removed important legal safeguards from public awareness. Vincent accepted responsibility for failing to question that process and stepped away from public office, acknowledging that lasting trust required transparency as much as authority. On a clear spring afternoon, a public ceremony marked the official reopening of the restored Omega Sanctuary headquarters. Families, students, attorneys, medical professionals, guardian representatives, and registry officials gathered together beneath banners celebrating partnership instead of division. Noah stood quietly near the front of the crowd as a commemorative plaque honoring the sanctuary's founders was unveiled. The names of his parents appeared among those recognized for preserving the organization's guiding principles. Despite extraordinary challenges, he felt a mixture of gratitude and peace rather than sadness, knowing their hope had finally reached the future they imagined. As the ceremony concluded, Dominic walked to Noah's side. There were no reporters demanding dramatic statements, and no officials questioning forgotten laws. Before hundreds of witnesses, Dominic gently reached for Noah's hand. Noah accepted without hesitation. The gesture carried none of the urgency that had surrounded the impossible declaration made 1 year earlier inside a crowded conference hall. This time, there was no confusion, no fear, and no uncertainty about what it represented. It was not a claim of ownership. It was the quiet affirmation of two people who had freely chosen to trust one another through truth, respect, and shared purpose. Around them, the audience responded with warm applause, celebrating not only their partnership, but also a society that had learned the strongest Alpha and Omega bonds were never created by power alone. They were protected by fairness, strengthened by choice, and sustained by laws that honored the dignity of every individual equally. If you were in their place, what choice would you have made? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy Alpha and Omega stories filled with love, sacrifice, heartbreak, and unforgettable second chances, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next journey.